Okay, let's take a look at the Hebrew verbs, because they're what's happening. A verb, as is probably very obvious, is a word is used to describe an action, a state, or an occurrence, and it forms the main part of the predicate of a sentence. The predicate being what happens to the subject in the sentence. Either the subject will be doing an action, something will be happening to the subject, or the subject will be persisting in some state. Hebrew is a very verbal language. Verbs do a lot of the heavy lifting of the language. They do some things that even English verbs don't do, and they work rather differently from English, so they deserve special attention, and so we're going to give that to them now. This is really getting into the real meat of interpretation and understanding how Hebrew works as a language, is within the verbs. First, let's get an idea of English verbs in our head, though. In the simplest terms, verbs will demonstrate either a action or a state of being. So we've got actions there on the left-hand side. He ran. We are jumping. These are actions. They're movements. We can also describe through verbs states of beings. Most commonly, this is done in English through a combination of some form of the to be verb, which is, am, are, was, were, and an adjective. She is smart. He is great. Um, the dog is smelly. Uh, Kind of bouncing off that idea, there are some verbs in the English language that somewhat demonstrate a state of being. The cheese stunk. Well, the cheese doesn't really do anything. It's not moving. It's not rolling around. It's emanating odor, but that's sort of a state of being there. English verbs demonstrate time, and that is time in relationship of the reader or the hearer in relationship to the action that is occurring in the sentence itself through tense. And so here we have past, present, and future tense. I jumped. I jump. I could also say in the present tense, I am jumping. That would probably be more logical for us. Or I will jump. And then you've got a full conjugation through the first person, the second person, and the third person, masculine and singular, something we differentiate in the pronouns but not in the verbs, as well as the plural, we. You'll see that I have included, in a lot of cases, y'all. The most English, common English, formal English, does not include the second person plural, except if you get down here in the South, in which case we do have y'all. And so that becomes convenient for us when we begin to go through these conjugations. And of course, the third person plural, they. And, there are things we add on to the suffixes. We add on to the ed. We add on to jump. The root of jump is, if we add jump plus ed, we make that past tense, as opposed to the just bare jump in the present tense, although you notice we do add an S on for subject verb agreement on the third person. He jumps. And we use the helping verb will to indicate a future action. I will jump. You will jump. And so on. Another quality of verbs that some people kind of forget about but is important to keep in mind is the transitive versus intransitive verb. A transitive verb is something that the subject does to an object. He painted the wall. The action is going against some other object, or for that matter. Dogs are chasing the cat. Wall and cat are direct objects there. We also have intransitive verbs in which the subject is not doing anything to anything other than itself. The tower fell, or I will rest. Those are intransitive verbs. They never have a direct object. Looking at how Hebrew begins to form its verbs, most Semitic languages, Hebrew being one of them, base words off a triconsonantal root. There are a few biconsonantal roots, but we'll primarily be looking at triconsonantal roots to begin with, words with three consonants. And so We have a three consonant word here: mem, lamed, kaf. As a noun, that would be king, a king. The Masoretes would put the vowels in there, and Ezra would have pronounced it this way, and the Masoretes just note that with the vowels. With the sigils, melik would mean king. We discussed with nouns, if we add the feminine ending in there, there are some vowel changes there, but you're not concerned with that. We're just looking at the fact that this masculine noun has now been made feminine, and malka means queen. If the shurik tav ending is added to the end of it, it becomes a kingdom. It becomes a place that a king rules, the area that a king rules over. Just like, a suffix, much like our own English, if we add dom, D-O-M, to king, it becomes the place that the king rules, his kingdom. Down there at the bottom, we see the basic Hebrew verb, malak. The comet's patak indicates that this is a perfect verb. We'll discuss what perfect means in a minute, but at that point we have a verb: he ruled. He acted as a king acts. He performed the office of a king. All those words are based off the same three consonant root, mem, lamed, kaf. There we have what we're going to look at is our paradigm word here: kof, tet, lamed, katal. It is the word, the root means to kill. And so you'll see that we've delineated the first, second, and third position, moving from right to left as Hebrew does. So, Hebrew roots often demonstrate peculiar morphological changes because of the nature of their consonants. And what I mean by that is that certain consonants just kind of do weird things from time to time. As we see part of the conjugating, just like in English, conjugating would be adding ed onto the end of a verb, or adding s onto the end of a verb. We'll be doing the same thing, but we'll be adding letters onto the front and the back of the verb, and in some cases that can cause strange things to happen, particularly if certain consonants don't want to sit next to other consonants. So noon and yod often do odd things when they appear in consonants, in verbs. Likewise, the gutturals. There are some verbal forms that take a dagesh forte in one of the consonants, and if a guttural is sitting in those positions, you may or may not remember, gutturals don't like dagesh fortes. They don't take them, and so they'll spit that dagesh out and it'll do something to the verbs. If we have normal, and I say normal, letters, consonants that do not demonstrate these oddities, these letter changes, they're called strong verbs. And fortunately, kof, tet, and lamed do not demonstrate any bizarre, changes in vowels or changes in letters when we form things, and so it becomes our paradigm verb. It's called a strong verb because it does not demonstrate any of these changes. If you do happen to have a weak letter in there, a yod, a noon, a hey, an aleph, it can be called a weak verb. We don't really have to worry about this too much because logos will always be there to guide us, to tell us what the root of a verb is. When we parse verbs, we will be giving the number and gender of them, just like we did in nouns, but at this point we're actually adding on person as well, and so we're adding first, second, and third person. Because of this conjugation system, there's an implicit subject in these conjugations, and so katal, in and of itself, is actually a complete Hebrew sentence. It actually means he killed, and it can be translated as such. Even though we don't know who he is, we don't know who he killed, that in itself has a subject and a predicate implicit in the conjugation. Likewise for she killed, katla, so on and so forth. You can see the various conjugations there. The red letters at the end are what changes from for the various conjugations, and we will look at this again just down the line here. So, When I point you to a verb and I say parse it, you of course don't have to memorize this paradigm, but when I say parse this verb, you mouse over and you tell me what Logos tells you about this verb. And at that point, you should be able to give me, knowing the person, number, and gender of that verb, as well as what that root means, by looking up in our lexicon or looking at our info panel in Logos, a pretty decent translation of that verb should be able to pop out, and you should be able to give that. One thing you don't know about yet is stems, and this is a little bit unusual. It's fairly unique to Semitic languages like Hebrew. Uh, a stem is likened to the voice or the mood of a verb in English or in Greek. And I mean by that whether or not it's a passive or active verb, things like that. Kal is the basic stem. It actually means the light stem. That's all you need to know for right now. Later on, we'll learn that the nifal stem does denote a passive verb. So an action would be happening to the subject as rather than the subject doing the action. PL is a intensive verb, and so if the kal is he killed, if it happens to appear in the PL, it may be he slaughtered. The hifil is a causative, and so off. These were things we'll get to in the weeks to come, but right now all you need to know is these verbs we're looking at do have a stem, and it's called kal. Very simple meaning of a verb. The English verbal tense system is actually pretty sophisticated. It's pretty robust, and it has a lot of variety to it. You can see here we've got the past, present, and future, just like we had at the beginning of the presentation, but we can also further subdivide these tenses and give more expression to our meaning by thinking of, well, we've got simple verbs. I ate pizza. I eat pizza. I will eat pizza. We also have continuous action. I was eating pizza. I am eating pizza. Or I will be eating pizza. That's a continuous action. We have a perfect action. I had eaten all of the pizza when you arrived. You may not know what past perfect means, but if I said I had eaten all the pizza when you arrived, you know that the narrator is referring to a past tense event, and that the narrator had finished the action that he's describing. Likewise, that perfect continuous, the last one on that first column there, I had been eating pizza for 2 hours when you arrived. That action was in the past, but from the position of the speaker, I had been eating, he's actually not giving it a completed value there, and so it's a continuous action. This simple continuous perfect and perfect continuous or perfect progressive you sometimes hear can be described as aspect. So English verbal tense can indicate both time as well as aspect. These are things you may not necessarily know, but you actually know them intuitively. If I said any of these sentences, you would intuitively know what I meant. Without having to go into the grammatical details of it, you could describe what the specific time and aspect of my actions were. Time, of course, is the temporal relationship between the sentence as it is spoken or as it is read and the action. Did the action happen in the past? Will it happen in the future? Or is it happening as you read something? Aspect indicates the nature of the actions, whether it's completed or whether it's continuous. Whether it is you might say punctiliar, if it just happened once and stopped, or whether it continued on for some period of time and then ceased. All these things are inherent in the English verbal tense and when we conjugate our verbs. Hebrew verbal tense, I put a question mark there, is not nearly so complex. One might argue that makes it somewhat more flexible, but at the same time, it can make it somewhat more ambiguous. The majority of Hebrew grammarians now say that Hebrew actually does not indicate tense. Hebrew verbs do not have inherent with them a tense. And so you may hear me say tense further on in this presentation. most Hebrew grammarians would say I'm incorrect in doing that. Um, we are simplifying things here for the sake of understanding, but we're just going to go forward with a kind of a dumbed down version of this, not because of your mental capacity, but just because of the nature of what we're doing right here. We're going to simplify things as much as possible so that we can get our heads around the Hebrew verbal system here. So we're going to look at really two main conjugations here, one being the perfect and one being the imperfect. You'll also hear these referred to as the suffix and prefix conjugations, or the katal and yiktol conjugations. You'll see later on, this katal has become kind of a standard for paradigms. So I may refer to, and Logos does refer to, verbs as a katal conjugation or a yiktol conjugation, even if that's not the exact root that you're looking at. Because it's using the paradigm verb, the standard verb that we work out these various conjugations through is katal, and so they're using the transliteration of that as a marker for the type of conjugation we're looking at. We'll look first at the perfect conjugation. Generally, as far as aspect goes, the perfect conjugation denotes a perfect action. I don't mean that it's an excellent action, an action with a, but that it's a perfected action, an action that has been completed. Of course, if an action has been completed, most likely it refers to an action that happened in the past. And so we most commonly translate perfect verbs as past tense verbs in English. So this katal is a cal perfect third masculine singular from the root katal. That would be a full parsing of this verb here. And we would translate it, as you can see there, he killed, in a simple English past tense. Here's the full perfect conjugation that we've looked at before, but now that you know it's sometimes called a suffix conjugation, you can see why. Each of these verbs is inflected for its person, number, and gender based on the letters that are added on to the end of that. That is the suffix that is added on. You will note that there's both a masculine and plural, a masculine and feminine for the second person. You killed katal ta for the masculine, the second masculine singular, katal ti for the second feminine singular. Likewise for the second feminine plural and second masculine plural. But there is only one common plural perfect conjugation. Katalu, they killed. It does not indicate whether or not it is a group of men, whether it is a group of women, or whether it is a mixed gender group. Likewise for first person. It does not indicate gender in those nouns either, in those verbs either. To look at the imperfect conjugation, if the perfect tense denotes a perfected action, a perfected aspect, the imperfect shows a imperfected or incomplete action, which means we'll be looking at future tense. That's usually the best translation when we see this. Hence, yiktol is he will kill, something that will happen in the future, a cal imperfect third masculine singular. To think about this in a very logical sense, in Hebrew narrative, we're most often going to see a perfect tense because narrative described events that already happened. Now, if you're looking at prophecy, prophetic foretelling, or if you're looking at, in some cases, direct discourse with people, particularly think of God speaking to Abraham, Abraham, I will do this and I will do that. Well, then we'd expect imperfect tense. We'd expect the imperfect conjugation because we have it translated into a future tense. These actions that are imperfected have not occurred yet, and so it seems most logical to translate them with a future tense. Here's the full imperfect conjugation: yiktol, tiktol, tiktol, tiktoli, ektol, and so on and so forth. You can see that with the imperfect conjugation, it does actually differentiate between the third person masculine and feminine plural. And so, again, you shouldn't worry about that too much because Logos is always going to give you the conjugation. And so, this is just for your information that you can see these prefixes and some suffixes going on the imperfect conjugation. Here's where things get interesting. With the imperfect conjugation, though it normally, if it is by itself, indicates a future tense action, if you happen to see a Waw consecutive, that is a Waw conjunction, with a patak vowel and a dagesh forte appended to the front of any of these imperfect verbs, it actually converts the tense as we translate it. It will actually take that imperfect tense, that imperfect conjugation, which we have been translating as future tense, and it will convert it into a past tense. So we call this the Waw consecutive imperfect. Some refer to it as the Waw converted imperfect. It is really the backbone of narrative sequence in the Hebrew Bible. So you will see Waw consecutive verbs come up very, very often, and we'll always be translating them as past tense. So, take that and stick with that. If it lacks the dagesh forte and it lacks that patak, if it's just a regular Waw conjunction added onto the imperfect without those additional um, little features there, it's just a Waw plus imperfect. So in this case, and he will kill. It's retaining that future tense because this is not a Waw converted, this is not a Waw consecutive, this is just a Waw plus imperfect. The Waw consecutive has the patak underneath, has the dagesh in it, and so that will become past tense. This would be translated, and he killed, past tense. Um, this is something that Logos will differentiate for you, so that should not be a problem once we actually get into looking at the Hebrew text. Likewise, the perfect conjugation, which up till now we have described as best translated with a past tense verb, the perfect conjugation can be converted as well. So this Waw consecutive perfect will indicate a future tense translation. And so we would say, and he killed. Now, the interesting thing about this, this is much less common than the Waw consecutive imperfect, and so this shouldn't disturb you too much. But the interesting thing about this is you notice, just like the normal Waw conjunction, this has the schwa underneath the Waw, and it does not have a dagesh forte in that first consonant. And so there's not really a way to differentiate between the Waw consecutive perfect and a plain old Waw plus perfect that would indicate just a conjunction and a past tense verb. The nice thing is, Logos will always be there. Our English translations will always be there. Will allow context to help us understand what these verbs are doing within the Hebrew text. You should be aware of this alternate terminology. I alluded to it briefly earlier, but Logos does use these terms, and it does, and they're very common in commentaries, and it's basically understood that if you are using Hebrew language, that you will know these. The perfect, using that root kof, tet, lamed as the paradigm. Perfect verbs, sometimes referred to as katal verbs, imperfect as yiktal verbs. Waw consecutive imperfects are sometimes referred to as wayiktal verbs. The plain old Waw plus imperfect, wayiktal. So you can see with the Waw consecutive imperfect, that yod is doubled because of the dagesh forte. With the Waw imperfect, you just have the one yod transliterated, and then the Waw consecutive perfect, wekatal. Returning back to parsing, just because I want to give a little bit more information on this, letting you know what we know so far. We can parse any verb that comes across our plate now with the stem, with the conjugation, which these are our conjugations: perfect, imperfect, Waw consecutive imperfect, Waw plus imperfect, or Waw consecutive perfect. So we can parse them with stem. The only one we know now is cal. We'll learn more as we go on. The conjugation, those five we just looked at. Person, first, second, or third. Number, plural or singular. With gender, we can look at it being feminine or masculine, and the root of the verb, which of course the lexicons will translate for us. So here I have full parsings of three verbs, just so you can kind of see how it works. The top one is our katal, the cal perfect third person masculine singular. You sometimes see the shorthand 3ms, so we don't have to write out masculine singular every time, from the root katal. And of course that would be translated he killed. Beneath that, to the left, we have the cal perfect first common singular, so that's first person singular. I killed, katalti, excuse me. So that is I killed, translating that is that perfect verb as a past tense. And then there to the right, we have the cal imperfect three masculine plural, yiktolu. And if it is a imperfect, we would translate that with a future tense, so that would be they killed, because it is plural. Speaking of the root, you will always be looking up roots in the lexicon according to the third masculine singular perfect form. That's what's considered the lexical form. The root, of course, we've talked about. Logos also refers to that as the lemma. And so this is the entry in the concise Hebrew and Aramaic lexicon of the verb we've been looking at, katal. It actually gives us a very short entry because despite being the paradigm verb for many, many Hebrew grammars, it only occurs in the Hebrew Bible 3 times. So you can see all three times that appears: Psalm 139, Job 13, and Job 24. That's what that little dagger means at the end of a lexicon entry, that all known, undisputed instances of this word have been listed. Um, Lastly, let's talk about biblical syntax, biblical Hebrew syntax. The common order, at least for Hebrew narrative, is going to be verb first, followed by the subject, followed by the object. There are exceptions to this, but this is going to be your normal narrative. And so if we look there, we've got a cal perfect third masculine plural verb up front from the root yarad, and so that would be they went down. Well, who went down? The sons. The subject is following that verb. The sons went down. So the sons is our subject. That's the nominative noun there. Jacob there is in the genitive position, and so that would be a possessive. And so Jacob's sons went down. That's how we would translate those first 3 words. We have our direct object marker, the aleph tav, that we've discussed in our noun presentation, and so that is going to mark our direct object, the noun that is in the accusative position, and that describes what the sons went down. They went down the hill. So that full translation would be Jacob's sons went down the hill, and that is a Hebrew sentence.